all started there. Thank you for that. A couple of things. As we move along, just in terms of the mission here, is to talk a little bit about technology, education, how things have pushed us into a little bit of a direction that was maybe a little unforeseen and challenged us in ways that we maybe haven't really had before. And I want to thank Steve and Learning Revolution for the opportunity to come on here and share a few thoughts and to get some input from those of you around and joining us today. And I thank you all for doing that. Welcome back for episode 3, The Pandemic Educator. Last week, Kelly Walsh emphasized the importance of developing one's online presence as a virtual educator to keep students engaged with their learning. This week, we'll focus further on this area of concern shared by so many teachers and administrators and parents. The danger of getting lost in the jump to online learning and failing to meet the challenge of this continuing of learning that needs to happen is quite a challenge for us all. That's why I've entitled this episode, Falling Through the Virtual Cracks. First, I'm really concerned about the engagement of learners. And as we move further into this new remote learning format, I worry that as weeks go on, we may start to see a trend of losing the connections with some of the students and the learners out there. As things become more familiar and normal, they also become more relaxed and maybe dropping out a bit. And there's a number of ways that we can monitor activity within our courses. And from this data, we should be able to be as vigilant as ever as making sure we're reaching out, connecting to the learners, the family, the support structure when times of them dropping off tend to occur. And this may become really more necessary as we move away from this newness of, hey, we're learning online now. This week's points of emphasis, I want to look at 3 things. First of all, the idea of flexibility. It's been a little bit of a topic we've jumped in with here and there over the past several weeks. I want to look at that in terms of why is this so key to finding academic success for our learners. Then I also want to look at learning styles, special needs. These are 2 important things that we need to make sure we're giving attention to as we start to reach out to our learners. And this is from crafting our lessons for delivery online and then the actual delivering of those and the follow-up after the learning has happened. And thirdly, the micro-consumable teaching, sometimes referred to as micro-learning. And I think this is something that everyone should put in the back of their mind when they're starting to plan things, and it really can chunk out information in a way that makes it a bit more consumable by the learners that we're trying to connect with. First, let's take a minute to look at flexibility, and I've gathered up some articles, and all of these again will be available to you on the resource page at the Pandemic Educator website, and we'll put that up here towards the end. But I've pulled out a few things here, and you've probably encountered some of these articles or posts that fall under this theme, at least in part, of flexibility with delivering online instruction. I think this is really critical. In the classroom, a very controlled environment allows for learning to take place within certain established parameters. I don't care how many rules or suggestions you provide families about how, when, and where you want students to work for remote education. The learning environments will be vastly different, in some cases from house to house. This is where an emphasis on flexibility can really make the difference. I've included a couple of quotes from some articles that I ran across in the past week here. Many are realizing the importance of this flexibility, and some are actually finding some quite innovative ways to address this, and while others are kind of doing trial and error and seeing what will work. And in this case, I think flexibility has to be something that's declared by leadership as within an organization, that flexibility is an important component of what needs to be delivered in the experience. And once leadership has taken that in and then sort of disseminated that and practiced it and modeled it with their own staff, I think that becomes part of that critical vision and constantly needs to be reiterated with staff in an education setting. This time requires us to have that flexibility. One article I referenced here is from Akron Schools. They've instituted a program where support staff, normally based within the schools, are trained to reach out to families and students who've been absent or disconnected from their online learning. Truly, I think this is flexibility at its best within a school system. Now you're leveraging those individuals who you have within that family of the school who have something very purposeful they can do to help out. And it's really getting the entire school community involved and making sure that all students are getting the most they can out of the learning experience. Great example of how flexible roles need to be, and a shift. We talked about that in week 1, the shift of that role that has to happen, moving from this sort of face-to-face in most cases to an exclusively online format. The other thing is to look at the idea of learning styles and special needs. First, let's talk about learning styles. Now, this is something, if you've been in education a while, you hear about this and you talk about this, and you can do learning inventories and things like that to figure out where people's strengths and weaknesses and challenges may be. But I think we need to look at both of these and make sure they're included in how we plan to deliver things online. Traditional lessons were put together in a way to try to address these differences within the classroom. One thing that's absent, which I think is very important in a lot of ways, is the body language that sometimes would give a teacher the clue as to whether the student was getting it or not. Thus trying a different approach and learning style target might help the student. Sometimes knowing that that's the case becomes a challenge now, because you don't have that direct contact, perhaps, other maybe through a little video like we have here. But that requires some new senses to be able to pick up on that, perhaps. In the world of online delivery, I think sensory information about the condition of the learner may be quite limited. So recognizing the struggles of a student with the way the content is being transmitted may be difficult. This is where some attention to learning styles is helpful when you're designing the class presentations. There's a lot of good resources to connect these styles to content delivery, and I've included a few articles in the resources if you want to explore that a bit further. I apologize, the diagram of the 7 different types I included there is so tiny. I was trying to fit it onto that slide. That is also linked on there where you can see the full image and perhaps read it without having to use a magnifying glass or some glasses like I do. I don't think it's out of place for you to have your students complete a learning style inventory. It could give you a baseline. You may already know them well enough to know where those challenges might be with online delivery with some of your students, and it would be worth sort of making some mental notes about that and how that impacts your planning. Next, I want to take a look at the special needs. This topic came up. We had a question on the show just about how do we address these needs, because with services being delivered in the schools, how do we ensure that's going to go on now in a very different format for many of these learners? I've provided a couple of things. First is a 2-page document from the Education Department, maybe 3 actually, and it's got some really good FAQs, basic sort of information about what does the U.S. Department of Ed say about special education and delivering this. And it's worth looking at that, and the FAQs may give you some good information right out of the gate to be able to refer to. There's also a video that I've included here that was distributed by the Council for Exceptional Children. It's really good, it has some really good strategies in there and free resources for teachers wanting to connect with these learners as best as possible. It is a pretty long video, and I would encourage you, though, I know it's at the very end, they opened it up for questions, and that's in the recording. I would say listen to some of those. Some people had some great questions, and there was some good responses back to them. So it may be worth you taking a little bit of time to go through and do that. Let's move on to this idea of micro-consumable teaching. And if this was my micro-learning, then this would be my topic I'd be covering. What is micro-learning? What is this idea? And the truth here is you want to really be concise and have a brief learning experience honed in or very granular to perhaps one topic or concept. And then you use a wide range of strategies to be able to present these and then get back from the learners that they've been able to acquire that. And if you think of this as small chunks that you want to, um, give them 3 or 5 minutes of something, and then, you can check that understanding, check where they are, and then another set of that. I think it really bodes well for design in terms of online learning. Um, Much of this connects to the learner behaviors of shortened attention spans, which, if you follow some research, you see how that's been going in the past years. Also, how do they choose or want to consume information? And also gives the ability to sort of stop and go with their learning on their schedules. So if they can't sit for the entire, let's just say, hour-long course, now they're going to sit for 5 or 10 minutes, get something done, then come back for the next section. I'd encourage instructors really to review some of the basic principles of microlearning so that some of this could be done in your own classrooms. I tend to think about any lesson as how can I divide this up into about 3 to 5 minute parts, incorporate a variety of media formats, embed sort of constant review, checking for understanding and repetition so that I know that they've acquired the content, the knowledge, the skill that I'm working on. Generally speaking, microlearning focuses on just one concept and sort of taking it from definition to application and just round it out with that assessment. It's maybe not appropriate for every single learning situations for sure, but I do think it helps with engagement rates with the learners in a course. This brief kind of consumable high engagement characteristic of this type of learning is a great way to keep the online learning sort of fresh and moving. And those are some kind of things I wanted to throw out there your direction as a group. And I do have someone with me today who's got a lot of experience in the world of online learning. And Dr. Joel Medley, I've known Joel for a good while now. It comes to us from K-12 and the Director of Leadership Development. And he's had a wealth of experience, not only in online learning and running schools. He also has teaching background. He has, he's directed charter school and magnet school organizations at the state level. He really has a lens that I think is valuable at looking at what does this online learning look like today. With the experience he has, what do we need to be prepared to do as we move week by week here to make this a better and better experience? And so with that, I do want to welcome you, Joel, to coming to the Pandemic Educator today and helping us out with this discussion.
Dave, I really appreciate the opportunity. So looking forward to whatever questions may come up to be able to just kind of help out. And I'm going to ask before we jump into this, if you're here, if you can use the chat feature here in Zoom, just let me know. Are you a teacher? Are you a school leader, primarily a parent? That'll give me an idea so that I can kind of shape some of this to be best for you. And the one thing that I will mention, folks, is that I have taught in both traditional and charter schools and ended up running one of the first virtual schools here in the state of North Carolina. Grades kindergarten through 12th grade, graduated the first class virtually, which was nice. And currently I'm training school leaders across the country in virtual learning and instructional leadership. So really excited to be here.
Well, great. Is there anything else you want to share with us just about anything else you do currently? I'm sort of intrigued by this leadership development and what do you really see you have to do for administrators? Because I know looking at the chat, we've got some people from administration. What do you see as your mission to help out all the way down, hitting those people in the classroom, the students, with your work at the administrative and the training at the leadership level?
So one of the things that we have really stressed with the school leaders, and we try to do this with a balance between our synchronous and our asynchronous training that we offer, is we have to model to you. You model the teachers so that they take what they see and that's how they instruct with those students. So it's truly trying to have that continuity of learning all the way up and down the chain. The neat thing is I do have 2 students that attend a full-time virtual school, and I had a third that was in brick and mortar. So he is now home. So we are kind of learning that side with you, and it's been neat that his teacher has called and said, hey, I need some help with ideas. Can you help me? So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, good. Yes, I know a lot of us are at home with kids. Mine are older and one left in college, but it'll be done in another year. So I can't imagine really having younger kids and thinking, okay, now we've got to also be the teacher at home. And I know so many people are in that situation. Couple of questions to start out with, just looking at your experience. Last week we talked to Kelly Walsh from Emerging EdTech, and he was really emphasizing this idea of your online presence and the importance of building that and maintaining that to make things successful in terms of learning in an online environment. Help us define what that means and what role you think this really plays in that online learning experience.
Well, I kind of look at online presence in three ways. Number one, you've got to be easily found. Number two, you've got to be easily seen. And number three, you've got to have something to offer. And I want to take that and I want to break that down into a real world school setting. So bear with me as I kind of lead into this, because to do that, and I'm going to use teacher mentoring as a very specific example. If we're going to do some things differently, we've got to back up. We have to think differently in order to believe differently so that we do differently. So it's head, heart, hand. That's the way that progression works. So with teacher mentoring, I mean, typically you would see, this brand new teacher that you're working with every single day in the building. You would have, set aside time that you would meet with them and have a conversation. You'd be providing expertise and feedback to them. All of those same things can still be done in the virtual environment. So if you back up and you talk about the way that works with, being easily found, teachers can use this, administrators can use this, a teacher mentor can use this. Create a power hour. Set time on your calendar in this time of virtual folks where they know you are available at any time. You hit them during that hour, I'll answer it as quickly as I can. And you put that out there. So that's being able to be easily found. The second part of that is seen. One of the things that we're often guilty of, and I'm an avowed introvert, so I really do this a lot, is I will turn that video off. I can exist in this world with that video turned off, but the key about being seen is something that you mentioned earlier. We often forget that there's really someone on the other side. When I was a head of school in a virtual school, I would send out something called the Medley Minute. It was a 60-second message. I used an avatar and recorded my voice. But when I would see these families at face-to-face outings, I had some kids that had no idea who I was. The mom would be like, hey, this is your principal. And they would shake their heads and wouldn't want to talk to me. But when I started talking and they recognized that voice, there it is. So make sure that camera is on. But the last piece, and Dave, you kind of took some of that, is you've got to have something to offer. It is that micro learning. It's those small pieces of potent information that you need to be able to give. So it goes back to that old statement, do we want to go a mile wide or an inch deep? In these sessions, you've got to be an inch deep and it's got to be power packed. But that online presence is critical because this is new for everyone. And the last piece that I would say to this about the online presence is that every single person in this chain has to have a growth mindset. It's not going to go perfectly. It's not going to be spotless, and that's okay. What a wonderful opportunity to be able to model that for our kids and encourage them along in this online setting.
Yeah, probably individually, we could all look at, okay, my first class I did online, or my first video I made for my class, or the first time they saw me. Compare that now to 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks in, and see how that improvement has happened. And part of that's developing out that online presence, I think, which is so important. That's good. Well, being part of this, online learning platform that's got a good history, it's really been out there to I don't know how many students K-12 serves. You could probably rattle a number off for me, but I know that even during this time, there may be some challenges that your organization has faced during this pandemic. And this is an organization designed for this type of delivery. But I know with the change in dynamics here, it's probably all, put out some challenges for you. And, what have you had to do to address those challenges to get things pointed in the right direction?
Well, the first challenge that we ran into is, so many of the schools are public schools, they're charter schools. And with, legislatures or governors stepping in and saying, we're going to shut down the public schools. The question became, did that apply to the virtual schools where kids were learning in their home or not? So there was some lack of clarity there, but that has pretty much been resolved, as most of the full-time online schools are open and serving kids across the country. So, those experiences have really helped us. But one of the bigger issues is we have stressed with our leaders, there's got to be more understanding here, because now we've gone from a teacher being in their home with children at school. Now they are also serving as the learning coach while their kids are at home, while they're also teaching kids. So we've had to help, kind of manage and work through some of those pieces. But the bigger piece was, how do we give back? I mean, we have more than 20 years of experience in doing this. We've got somewhere around 6,000 online teachers across the country, serving more than 100,000 kids. I mean, how do we give back our expertise? And one of the things that we have done over the last several weeks is we've been doing several COVID-19 trainings. I'm going to put this in the chat box, but the Facebook page, where we have a significant amount of Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives, articles and things that are coming out, just be able to share, lesson plans, strategies with teachers, thoughts for school leaders. So it has been, the piece of how do we give back? And the one thing that has happened is the number of students wanting to attend a K-12 powered school has exploded.
Yeah.
So many of them, are already full and maxed out and can't take in those additional students. So it's been, how do we look at this? What does this look like for next year? When will schools open? So it's just those logistical planning pieces going down the road.
Yeah. A couple of questions I'll throw out there that have come through the chat window here. First, there's a question about ways to adapt teaching so the gifted, bright students can be challenged along with slower learners. So you have this variety of learners, just like many of us have in our regular classrooms in the face-to-face world. Is choice the way is kind of the question, or is there a different way to be looking at this?
So there are a couple of ways to do this. I mean, you could have scaffolded offerings for the students that, hey, this is your level, start working here. But one of the things is you would lose the connection of all of those kids being together. So you can bring them together for a Zoom meeting, I don't know, say Mondays at 9. Yeah. And we all use checks for understanding, tickets out the door, exit tickets, whatever you want to call it, but invert that. You could do an entry ticket so that when you put the one problem or two problems up to see if the students have mastered the concept that you taught. If you see that students have excelled, well, they would go into breakout room 1 and Zoom or Blackboard, whatever platform that you're using. If they got one of the two, and maybe they go to breakout room 2, but if they missed both of them, then that's breakout room 3. So that you can float through those breakout rooms in order to be able to pivot on the fly. The one thing that I would say, particularly to the teachers that are here, just understand, you can still pivot in these lessons. You just have to be a little more intentional how, and you already have the skills to be able to do it. It's just utilizing and becoming familiar with the technology to make those adjustments.
Right. One other question, and what we can do is you may need to think about this if you can't roll one off right away, because towards the end we'll have another opportunity. You'll have a bit of a minute to check into it. But there was a question about suggestions where someone can find information to design out a summer academic bridging program for pre-K 4 to 12 school. And I know a lot of us are facing a situation where we're trying to think about, okay, how do we conclude this year and start the next year and kind of keep it rolling and not have a gap in there somehow?
Well, one of the things that I would do, I would have to go back and look at the specific listing, but I did put up there the Facebook page for K-12 talent development and community. There's a whole host of things that are being put up there. Look at the same organization, K-12 talent development and community YouTube page, because there are videos that are being loaded. There may be something there. But I'll see if I can find something specific, Dave, and then get that to you.
Okay. All right. Great. The next question or primer I have here is one of the things in the news when I've been looking here recently over the past week or two is maybe more direction now. At least in North Carolina, they've sort of designated, oh, you can now code these things with new sort of grades, final marks. But is, some are looking at taking grades, some looking at not taking grades, passing, failing, all these sort of flavors in between those. I was kind of curious from an established online community of learning, how do you feel about this? And if we're not taking grades, or if we're limiting the assessments, or in some cases dropping some of the formal assessments, that would naturally be a part. How do we get to that true sense of understanding of what do students know, and also that balance, hey, this is an odd situation, and we have to sort of honor that individual situation difference that's going on?
This is kind of a hard question, because my opinion really doesn't matter, to the world, because like you mentioned, here in North Carolina, that's kind of been settled with what the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction have done. And you're going to see that, happening all across the country. But, I guess I have to look at this in two different ways. We need to segment this out as final grades and ongoing grading to determine where a child is. Right. Final grades at the end of the year need to be in such a way that wherever that student ends up, if they're at the same school but they're upper grade level, if they're at a different school, maybe they're in a different state, that whoever is receiving that child knows and understands what that designation means. I mean, that's going to be critical for their seamless learning as they continue through. But even in this virtual world, you can still assess. The idea that, well, I haven't been trained in order to assess a child. I said it earlier, the teachers, here you have everything that you need. It's all right here. It's just going to be applied a little bit differently. Some simple examples. If you've got elementary kids, you use Zoom, get them in that one-on-one setting, have them do the dibble so that you can see what their fluency is. That's easy. If you've got high school kids that are doing some kind of a written project, we're still going to provide them feedback on those drafts, and they're still going to get some kind of a grade towards the end of that. I mentioned the entry tickets, but it's one of those things of how do we do some things differently? Instead of them doing a problem to turn into you, or to use a worksheet that would then come in, and pick up the tool Flipgrid. Have them record a 2-minute video explaining how they arrived at their answer. Because it's not just, yes, they got it, no, they didn't. Now you're seeing the thought process behind it. And that's what we really got to make sure that we get to. And, ultimately, A, B, C, D, F grades, I don't know that that's really going to be helpful. But we still have the ability, and what a wonderful opportunity now to really shift into a competency-based structure. You can turn around and say, hey, this child has mastered the skill, they are approaching the skill, or they've not gotten their keyword yet, because you're reinforcing that growth mindset component. There's enough brain power to be able to address that need, and it's just having those conversations and rely upon some technology to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think maybe this idea of grades really is sort of maybe calmed away, or will start to go away a little bit, and it maybe the focus, which I think would be great, will come a little bit more intensely on the feedback, ways you can provide feedback to students to help them with their learning. And having trained a number of teachers, well, lots of teachers on Canvas learning management system, for 2 years, I've been telling them, oh, you can leave them a video comment or audio comment, or you can do this. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wait, that's a good thing to do. And I could really use that. That's some great feedback when I'm not there in person to provide that. So there's tools out there.
Dave, with not having your state mandate assessments at the end of the year, it is incumbent upon schools to make sure that they have some kind of a growth measure during the year throughout to be able to see what that looks like. Here we are with so many of our states not going to have those integrated assessments, but yet we already have beginning of year, and we've got middle of year data. And with the kids that are attending these K-12 powered schools, there will be an end of year assessment as well. So we can see longitudinally where they've been and where they've come.
Right. And I know at the higher ed level, just because my son's a junior at East Carolina University, his exams are starting up. It's getting to be that time of year, and it's going to be a little bit different experience, I know, for him. And he still has them. There's still going to be an assessment. It's just sort of changed format. And he was telling me how Some instructors say, well, you have to log in at this time and start the exam and complete by this time. Some say it's going to be open all day. You just need to complete it sometime during that day or a larger window. And I think that flexibility piece, people have had to adopt into this idea of assessment and the grading of students to give them the latitude to be able to fit that into the situation that they find themselves in personally. So.
I mean, if you stop and think about it, when we were in college, as undergrads, in the 90s, the thought of you would have to sit and take this, and folks, I am a history teacher, so if you're social studies and what I'm getting ready to say is going to make you cringe, I'm sorry. And we have to take this Western Civ assessment that you're wondering, when am I ever going to see this again? And you have to do that factual recall. I mean, is that the most authentic way of really going, does that student understand not just when that date happened, but the concept and everything that led to it? And this situation forces those conversations, not only for authenticity of the assessment, but the relevance to the real life and getting to the aspect of the rigor. So this is truly, as the title says, a learning revolution. Why? Because we're having to think differently, and it's going to start to change some of our beliefs that will ultimately translate into actions.
That is so true. And this one we could both chime in a little bit on, but I really wanted this week to think specifically about these strategies. How do we help keep kids and learners, students, any kind of learners you have? You could be in a business corporation, or you're providing that learning remotely. How do you keep them from sort of falling through the cracks? And what advice would you tell people who are joining us or listening later to this show to help try to ensure that that's not going on?
Yeah, so this is heart and soul of me. I love this question. And if you're a teacher and you've had these kids in your room, throughout the year, you're going to know what to do. I mean, you're going to know who or the kids are going to be tending to disengage. So we've got to make sure that we get back to them. And Reba, I see exactly what you put there about connecting with the students. I look at it this way: it's connection before content, it's relationships before rigor, it's empathy before expectations. That's critical. When you get them into the room, give them time to socialize, to talk to one another, to see one another. Now, do make sure, teachers and leaders, that you talk about good online camera etiquette. Those are some things that we really need to drill into. I mean, because Google, poor Jennifer with Zoom, or Zoom and Tony, you're going to see two awful examples of adults. But you do need to make sure that you're teaching that to the kids. But the other thing that I want to make sure that I point out to you is be on the lookout. Our kids are smart. And if you see a kid like this the whole class, then chances are they have taken their photo and they have just posted it in the Zoom account. It's like, the old action movies where someone's breaking into a bank and it's the constant recycling of those 10 seconds so it looks like that no one is there. Our kids will figure those things out. And it's up to you to be able to know that. A kid that's always raising their hand doesn't necessarily mean that they're engaged. They've learned that if I raise my hand, chances are the teacher's not going to call on me, so I'm okay. So you have to be thinking about those pieces. But the engagement aspect, don't lose sight of really talking to those folks. Pick up the phone and call those families. If your building lets you go back to visit your classroom, go sit in their desks. Get your cell phone. Record a 10 to 15 second video of why you miss that kid, or why you loved having them in their class, and send that to them. I guarantee you that will stay with them for years. But if you're hosting online sessions, a couple times a week, you've got 20 kids and you're only seeing 12 to 13, you got to get on the phone with those families. Where are they? What's going on? How can you?
One of the things that just came to my mind that I really tried to stress with some teachers that I was working with to help them keep some comments here about, they're not even logging into the sessions or so forth. That feedback can also drive your engagement, because if they know, they're looking at this, they actually wrote this back, they took a video and sent this back to me on my work I did, then it gives them a different level of accountability and sort of pushes them along, I think, in a way. And I think, again, feedback can be good for assessing, but it's also, I think, a driver, a little bit of engagement in the course.
I agree 100%. And one thing, Dave, that I think is often overlooked at this is what have we as school leaders, as school officials, what have we done to teach our families? These are the things that we need from you during this time. I mean, because we've got families that are not used to having to really do some of the lift with those kids, and you've got to be more intentional in having those conversations. It's not that you've got to get them to teach the lesson, but you have to take what is most important. You've got to take that and define their reality to help them help their kids. So again, that power hour I mentioned before, do the same thing. Be available for those parents. I mean, it's all about getting that. And the last thing that I will say is we just need to make sure that we understand that motion does not equal action. If I have a souped up sports car and I step on the gas pedal, I'm spinning those back tires, I'm making a noise, but unless I have traction, I'm not going anywhere. Right. And what is that traction? It's the relationship. We're used to seeing kids with us every single day, and now we've got to think a little bit differently about how to do that. Cards going home, phone calls to those kids. Like I said, the videos. If you're a leader here and your school has a Facebook page, use Facebook Live, so that they can see and hear you. There are ways to build culture that you don't have to be there. And sometimes it forces those of us that are introverts to really step outside our comfort zone. But the kids love that. And I remember that. This is not a lost year. It's just a year of challenge that we will get to rise above.
Well, great. Very good thoughts there. Well, Joel, hang around for just a minute. And again, if you have some questions for him or for us to talk about and to bring about here, just post them in the chat. I've got a couple of my recent observations I want to share, and then we'll bring Joel back in for some final Q&A here at the end in about maybe 7 minutes or so. I have a couple of things that I would bring to your attention that I found kind of interesting this week. And I guess I'm highlighting some of my technologists and educators, or educators who are technologists, some of my favorite ones. And this first one is just talking about technology is not always the answer. And I know we're trying to deliver some things and leveraging technology like we maybe haven't ever before, just as a group. But during the pandemic, when it comes to delivering things to your learners, take a moment really to think about ways you can assign students items to complete that kind of gets them up moving, interacting with materials, people, groups less than 10, maybe just family members, or places away from the screen. And Stephen Anderson offered this graphic in one of his posts recently, and it really has some great ideas. And I would tell you to think about these. I mean, sometimes giving, kind of charging them with, hey, you're in charge of making this experience happen for you, and here's what you need to do. And then you could come back, and maybe that's part of a writing activity or a short discussion online that could happen about, hey, what did that mean to you? How did that impact your understanding of that particular concept? And I've included a quote there from that particular posting he made, and just it's a way to encourage learning, and everything's not technology, and it's a way that you could engage learners in a very different way. So that was one of my observations. Another one comes from another one of my favorites, Eric Schenniger, who's if you've been looking at technology and education and leadership in technology for any length of time, you're sure to have run across him at some point. He sort of added this 10 list, top 10 list, and I called this sort of remote hot mess, things to kind of avoid. And everybody can kind of look at this. And in fact, if you go to his posting, people sort of say, hey, number 1, 5, and 6 are my favorite, or so forth. I think are the most important. But he really pushes us to think a bit about, what should we really try not to do in this situation to ease a little bit of that pressure off of our learners so that they can really function in a way to be successful. And I think he emphasizes some of the things we've talked about here, which is really, the communication, the importance of that, how to address these special needs and differences that students have with their learning. And just knowing that we're in this together to really make the best of this. Now I'll have to say, out of these, I really like the first two. And I have to say maybe number 2 is my favorite, because I just really see the feedback as the one thing to give some real priority attention to, because especially coming from the face-to-face to now exclusively online, I just feel like when you're dealing face-to-face, you have those opportunities naturally occurring. But now I think you have to find new ways to make sure that's happening. And I would encourage you to just go for it on any of these in terms of trying to avoid them, so that you don't end up with a little bit of a hot mess in your virtual learning world. And the last one, kind of for fun here a little bit, and I call this Pandemic Predecessors. And now Joel was talking about being an undergraduate in the 90s, and I'll have to say, I'm sorry, Joel, I show my age now. It was the 80s for me, but this particular resource takes us even further back into the 70s and 60s, and in some cases the 50s. And WGBH in Boston, they have put together this media library of some of the earliest of educational videos, and there's some really, really great things on there. And this was from an article on the Atlas Obscura site, which I get that newsletter. It's got some great geography related things, but also things like this as well. And you can learn a little bit about cooking and sewing, and and Joel, this is for you, there is one on disco dancing and the how-to. So I expect for you to jump in there and learn that here maybe this weekend. It could give you a little weekend activity while we're all quarantined. So when you get a break from the regulars, hey, check it out. They've got some great old videos in there that are well worth the while. And it makes you think, oh, well, you know what? We've been doing this sort of remote learning maybe a little longer than I thought. So check that out if you can. The resources that we have, again, for this week's show are all on the Pandemic Educator site there. And all of these graphics, there'll be links to the articles and where those are located, so you can jump in and spend a little bit more time on those as well. Now at the end here, I want to bring Joel back in, and we can take a little peruse of the message board here in the chat and see if there's anything we want to jump in there with. Incidentally, the pictures I chose this week were the top picture of what many schools look like right now. And then the other 3 pictures just show us sort of a host of possible dynamics that could be going on with learning, especially in the K-12 world at people's homes right now.
So Dave, Peggy asked a question in the chat that I want to get to. Other than training parents, what are ways to be able to help them with their feeling of being overwhelmed? You know, I want to say this. I did a session yesterday kind of talking about this piece, and the key is this. Research in this time is showing that uncertainty is actually causing more stress than bad news. Mm-hmm. So it's that whole piece of I don't really know, and it's creating that word that we all like to avoid, and it's called fear. So in the chat box, let me ask you this. What is the opposite of fear? What are your thoughts that the opposite of fear is? I'm curious. Hope, all right? Courage. Yeah, yesterday when I did this, Yvonne, that was the number 1 that came up yesterday in my session, was confidence. You know, so you can see feeling in control. I take this a little bit differently. I think the opposite of fear is care, because fear is always worried about me and what's going on in my world. Care, you look at others. And, you know, to look at this, go back to the etymology of the phrase self-care. We didn't see that until about 15, 20 years ago. So care always implies others. Your kindness and your care is more contagious than the virus that we have in this world today. So what you have to do with those families is show them care. So here are some ideas. Get them on the phone, get them in a Zoom session, and number 1, just listen. That is critical, to just be able to make sure that they know that they're being heard. But you can also turn around and start asking them things like, you know, when do you think your child is best at learning? I can tell you right now, the one that's in that room behind me that we call the Texas tornado, from 8 to 10 is not the best time for him. So we have adjusted that flexibility, like Dave said, but also asked him what other duties are taking place at home. You know, so you're getting an idea, this is the instruction that we're expecting. These are the other things that they've got going on. And you start to help them phase through and create a schedule. I mean, one of the things that parents often forget about is send them outside. If you've got an elementary kid, they still need that recess. They need that mental break to get out and get away. But there are things that they can do in their own world to reinforce learning. If they're cooking lunch, get them in the classroom, use that to reinforce fractions. You know, there are a ton of online things being done by, by zoos or museums that are things that they can access to really help their children understand and meet their passions. But the last thing that I guess I would say to this, in going back to what I said earlier, your kindness is critical. If you know that you've got two families that are really struggling, if they send you an email, prioritize them. Get to them first, because that'll make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and I really encourage a lot of people that I've spoken to, both administrators and teachers, is to, before you're shooting out a lot of information to people, really think about put yourself in the receiver's shoes of that a little bit. I mean, is it succinct? Is it just straight to what it needs to say? Is it clear? Last week we were talking about lessons, and I said, please, when you're posting things, what I always encourage people to do at the very last thing is to put, hey, what do I need to turn in? And just reiterate exactly what that is. All the stuff you said before is not going to cloud it. It's just, I need to do this. And it I think gives them a little bit of reassurance that, okay, I know exactly what I got to get done, and I'll do this, and limits that. Instead of seeing, a whole funnel of things, you now have one item that you're really focusing on.
And train those families, not just to ask the kid, hey, did you turn that assignment in? Did you do that? But ask to see it. Kids, again, will be kids. It was interesting, the one I just called the Texas Tornado, was in a Zoom yesterday with his teacher, and they were asking, how are things going? And his response was great. It's not fun being quarantined in with a family when your dad's a principal. That made me smile, and you know what? That's what it's all about.
and do some things. I don't know if I mentor a number of kids, and I have a couple of 15-year-old guys that if I'm doing something, if they're coming over, we're talking, I've known them for years and years and years. I said, we're going to cook something, and we're going to learn how to cook. And I'll tell you one thing they're going to know is, well, okay, I can take care of myself because I can cook these things and understand that. And that's a type of learning that really is transferable and long standing. And I think you can learn in so many ways. And someone talked about making your kitchen the science lab. I think that's wonderful. I mean, there's so much science in what goes on in the kitchen to begin with, that I think that's a perfect way to start looking at this, and even getting outside. If I was teaching biology again right now, I would be thinking, oh, there's some really great things that we could do, just having them go outside and identify some things. Barring the one experience, I had a teacher one time teaching biology, wanted them to do a leaf collection, and sent them promptly out to go collect leaves without explaining what poison ivy is. So I think there are situations you have to think through quite carefully. Let's see. The history of dishes. Now that would be interesting. I think that would be something I'd like to learn a little bit more about. Again, if you have any questions, please just post them away onto the chat here. We've got just a few more minutes before I'll wrap some things up here. Yeah, cleaning. There's a lot of things with cleaning and what those cleaning products are doing. I think to help ensure that we're not passing things on from one person to the next. I think that's a great discussion to have. Any, Joel, from you, any last thoughts or things you want to sort of send people out for another great week of online learning, hopefully, as you made it to Friday, and although the days kind of blend together for me, I have to wake up and ask myself, what day is it? I think we do have the weekend, and whatever that means to people now, and then we'll get back again to our learning on Monday. Some final thoughts you may have.
The last thing that I will say, folks, if you have never read this book on Becoming a Leader by Warren Bennis, what a classic it is. And in his introduction, I've got the more updated version. He said something, and I read this last night, that has just stuck with me. He said, life itself is the career. Mm-hmm. So, as a teacher, as a leader, as a parent with your kids at home, understand that life itself is what matters the most. And don't ever lose sight of that. Yes, there's work to be done. Yes, there are students to be taught, but leading comes from who you are. So continue doing the great things that you're doing, because really folks don't understand the impact that teachers and administrators have right now. Families are talking about what you're doing with their kids. It's affecting families, it's affecting your colleagues. Y'all are the true central cog of everything that's taking place. So from my heart to yours, thank you for what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a true job that people have right now to get this to carry out as best we can and make it a beneficial time educationally for our learners. Thanks, Joel, for jumping in with us today. And a couple of things about the show. We'll be having this again next week, 1 o'clock on Friday as well. That one's entitled The Reflections of a Pandemic Teacher. I have a teacher that will be joining us, Joy Clark, who has agreed to help me out with that show. She's got some great insights, and I'll tell on her now and I'll tell on her then too. In the world of technology, she was starting out as one of the least technology accepting teachers that I knew. Quickly changed that and turned that around, and I think she'll be able to share some things about what she's had to do in her own teaching to move from that classroom to something online, and what that's meant to her and her experiences from her early teaching days all the way through today. Take some time, look at the resources. Again, you can go to the website and they're all linked there. You can grab a hold of them. The show will be posted there. Usually it takes about a day for me to get it back. And again, thanks, Steve, for putting this whole conference selection of sessions together for us with the Learning Revolution. And we look forward to seeing you all next week at 1 p.m. Have a good afternoon.
Dave, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.